In the United States, the past few weeks have been very interesting politically. So since I don't really delve into political topics by themselves on this channel, I thought I'd illustrate my thoughts on the 2024 US presidential election by tangentially relating it to a cartoon topic. Now, the US is no stranger to Donald Trump, and a lot of people thought the country was sick of him. But clearly this was not the case. You can explain this away as the Democrats having done something wrong, and they obviously did. But the Republicans do have a shift in mind that I think coincided with the spirit of the country. The United States is generally a right-leaning country. There are many pockets that are more progressive, but I think the US is socially conservative at its core. Trump ran as a Republican not because he himself was a conservative, but because his anti-establishment rhetoric fit better with the conservative voter base. I'm going to burst some bubbles by saying this, but the US elected a left-wing candidate in 2024, from a choice of two left-wing candidates. Now, why
do I say this?
Because the closest active American politician to Trump in terms of policy and rhetoric is Bernie Sanders. Not any mainstream Republicans, and certainly not before his time in office. This was why the 2016 primary debates made for such great TV.
This is a tough business to run for president.
I know. You're a tough guy, Jeb.
And we need to have a leader that is principled. You're never going to be president of the United States by insulting your way to the presidency.
Let's see. I'm at 42 and you're at 3, so far I'm doing better.
Doesn't matter.
So far I'm doing better.
Normally they don't, because the candidates usually don't have that much disagreement. But from an anti-establishment point of view, watching Trump basically debate the entire Republican establishment back then was a must-watch. You basically got to see the Republican version of Bernie Sanders actually have conflict within his own party. Trump did so well because populism is more malleable to the Republican voter base.
Net, you raised taxes by $500 million. Is that right?
You know, Mitt, let's talk about how stubborn the facts are.
Answer the question.
The fees I think you raised were more like $500 million, not 240. You came into office with a deficit,
I asked you a
and you
question.
left with one.
You know, facts are stubborn things. Let's get the facts right, okay? I came in, there was a $3 billion
tax cuts in 2002.
You know, Mike, you make up
facts. Facts didn't talk, and that says something, so let's slow it down.
There are various reasons for this, but the biggest one is that, in general, lack of institutional control can make a party feel as though the establishment doesn't work for them, even when their party is in power. When Republicans are in power, it really doesn't feel like it's socially or institutionally. The media certainly isn't in their control, and when it's not, the only voice a conservative truly has is through their vote, which they use to vote for the man who claims to want to dismantle the systems that don't work for the quote-unquote average person. This does lead to some interesting side effects. For one, Trump isn't in favor of free markets. He might pay lip service to the concept to garner votes from economically right-leaning people, but in practice he's a protectionist and a populist at heart, which cannot be reconciled with a conservative right-leaning worldview. Actual conservatives will and should rightly call out Trump for his absurd plan to tariff all imports. Meanwhile, they're supporting Javier Milei for getting rid of tariffs. There is no logical way you can have these two positions at the same time. There's no universe in which the US benefits from tariffs and Argentina doesn't. A lot of the support base for Trump doesn't even fully grasp the economics of why tariffs don't work. Many moderate voters' rationale for voting towards Trump, and I know this because these types have been all over social media, was that things were cheaper during Trump's presidency. They'll say things like, the economy was better, but it's obvious that their understanding of what a better economy is based on what number they see next to a Big Mac on the McDonald's menu. The average American is economically illiterate, because we don't place enough emphasis on economics education in schools. And as a result, you have an entire country of people mass hallucinating a bad economy because things seem more expensive. You'll note that I said seem more expensive and didn't say things are more expensive, because while prices are up from before 2020, wages have gone up in a way that more than compensates for this. This means that the average American has more income than before and prices have gone up, but not enough that the higher income doesn't buy as much. The term vibe-session was coined a couple of years ago to describe this. The average American sees that a beefy 5-layer burrito at Taco Bell isn't 89 cents anymore, and thinks that that means it's a bad economy, even when their wages have gone up at a higher rate than the price. About 60% of Americans think the country is in a recession, despite the fact that most economists agree it isn't. The US isn't in a sustained period of low economic activity. It once was, but that has since passed. Are there still problems? Of course, and there always will be. There's no perfect time, and that's an unrealistic standard to have. By most measurements, though, the US economy is doing fine. Not great, but alright. Unemployment and inflation are both low right now, and I hear the stock market is doing pretty well also. And besides, the vote for Trump as a reaction to the economy under the incumbent party is also a pretty ridiculous reason, because these people voted based on what they remember from 4+ years ago, instead of the actual platform Trump ran on this time. Either voters didn't do their research, or they genuinely thought these tariffs would be a good idea, even when economists pretty much unanimously think they will fail and make things much worse. And you can't blame this on left-wing bias in academia, because economics is one of the few areas of study that it doesn't really infiltrate. When you tariff imported goods, what will happen is that companies will simply raise the prices of these goods to compensate. And if you ask the average Trump voter whose major issue was the economy how they thought Trump was going to change things for the better, you most likely wouldn't get a coherent answer. It's pretty much just, things were better a few years ago, and no reasoning to back up the claim that they'll be better again. I mean, when you hear the phrase, inflation is going down, people are going to think prices are going down, but that's not what that means. Inflation is only a rate of change, and a small amount of it is healthy for the economy. Inflation going down means that prices are going up, just not the expanded rate they once were. In other words, inflation is the slope of a price level versus time graph. If prices were to go down drastically, that would result in deflation, which has happened before, and it wasn't a good time. When you know prices will be lower the next day, it makes very little sense to invest today, meaning people just don't invest and economic activity goes down. And as we've established, a recession is a sustained period of low economic activity. You can probably connect the dots on what happens there. Now, how does this connect to SpongeBob SquarePants, as I said it would at the beginning? Well, there's a reason I focus so much on the economy, as it was considered a tipping point for how the 2024 election went. A lot of people think they're getting one thing, and that's usually not how it turns out. I mean, people are talking about lower prices for food and consumer goods, and then voting for someone who proposes tariffs that will objectively make those problems worse. And it's clear that when that happens, expectation does not align with reality. In much the same way, I can remember a time in 2015 when SpongeBob fans thought they were getting something, only to see that it didn't turn out as expected. And a lot of them gaslit themselves into thinking this was actually much better than before, because they didn't want to admit their expectations were unrealistic to begin with. In the middle of Season 9, it was announced that Stephen Hillenburg would rejoin the staff, along with other people who worked on the classic first 3 seasons. And they thought that this would rejuvenate a show that, at this point, was stagnant. The first half of Season 9 wasn't the best. It wasn't bad either, but it was very sterile and played things safe, which is not at all what a show like SpongeBob does when it's at its best. Fans expected for the episodes after the second movie to be at the level of Seasons 2 or 3, and in all fairness, the Season 9 episodes that came out after the second movie are probably the single best chunk of episodes outside of those first 3 seasons. But obviously it didn't last. Once Whirly Brains came out, the show's direction was pretty much set. SpongeBob was pretty much a Ren and Stimpy clone from then on, which is not what anyone asked for. SpongeBob is at its best when it focuses on the core principles of good verbal humor and atmosphere. And after Season 9 ended, it's like they asked themselves how they could ruin such a good thing they had going for themselves. Bikini Bottom became a more disgusting and aesthetically unappealing place, the stories became more recycled than ever, jokes were reduced almost exclusively to visual gags, and the thick outline art style compared to the gorgeous animation in the latter half of Season 9 was a step down. And with Hillenburg's passing a few years ago, I don't want to disrespect his legacy. It wasn't him that caused the show to be bad, rather the drive to do new things and innovate a show that's been on since 1999 leads you to do things differently for the sake of being different. The fans who expected a return to form got it, and then got slapped in the face with a complete 180 that had to gaslight themselves into believing everything was still good, are people I honestly feel sorry for. They essentially had a cartoon they were interested in turned into a cheap imitation of another that's not a fit for the style it originally had. And obviously, Seasons 6 and 7 will probably never be topped in terms of how bad they are, but that shouldn't be the standard either. In a similar way, Trump voters who expected a good economy because food and gas were cheaper a few years ago are in for a rude awakening if he goes through with these tariffs. But it's disturbing that conservatives of all people are the ones I have to have this conversation with. JJ Mccullough, who is a really informative Canadian conservative YouTube creator and political commentator, made a really good video about Trump that I will link below, and before anyone rolls their eyes at the fact that he's Canadian, I will admit that he is much more favorable to the US than most Canadians are. And he's probably more dialed into an understanding of American politics than most Americans are. In the video, he mentions the idea that loyalty to Trump is often more indicative of standing in the Republican Party than adhering to conservative principles is. And I think this idea is something that can be extended to the voters themselves. The Republican Party basically convinced people to abandon their principles and vote for someone who isn't even a conservative. And this has massively changed the party, because all of these voters now only have trust in one man, basically. They will chameleon their beliefs to be just like his, even if they contradict what their values were before they knew who he was. A lot of the Trump voters who said the economy was bad before will, in a few months, say the economy is magically better, even though it's been improved for at least a year and not much changed from month to month. And if things get worse, they'll do one of two things. They'll either deny that things have gotten worse, or they'll use every excuse in the book to explain why it's everyone else's fault but Trump's that it's gotten worse. We're about to enter a whole new era of cognitive dissonance, and as a matter of fact, it's pretty much already started. Thanks for watching, folks.